and they were just pelted with a media campaign that described them as evil, basically. It was just an evil plot to raise your taxes. And the funny thing is that obviously it didn't come close to getting the 60% vote needed to pass, but the funny thing is that there were two other amendments on the ballot, numbers 5 and 6, that faced almost an identical media campaign saying it's a plot to raise your taxes, and those both achieved over 60%. So it could seem that what you have with Amendment 4, hometown democracy, planning taken to the level of public votes on the defeat of Amendment 4, I'd like to ask you is it because the public doesn't care? The public doesn't care about planning, and the public doesn't want to have any say in it. And if that's the case, why would the governor initiate a big look? And why would the anything but more degradation of planning at the state level occur? And who wants to take a shot at that first?
I can go at it.
Okay.
The first thing you said is planning is a hard sell. And I didn't realize planning was a hard sell until I came to the U.S. Because I'm originally from the Netherlands, and planning is something that we actually talk about, and we actually don't have a hard time selling it. I remember when I was in class when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and they explained me the grand development scheme for the Netherlands. And I can still draw it, and I can still tell you exactly what it looks like. And I think anybody there nowadays can tell you what the plan is nowadays. So one of the big things is that we don't do a very good job as planners trying to sell it. We make our decisions in our own little world, like we typically do with our conferences. We don't talk with other people. We don't try to explain to people why it is relevant. And I think it is relevant, and we can tell them that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think that people do care desperately about what we would call planning, but they would just call about the future of their communities. And I think it's the way we talk about it that we struggle. If you think about, for those of you, I'm willing to bet I'm talking to a pretty sophisticated audience here, but if you see notices in the newspaper about public meetings, go look at one of these one time. Would you ever, if you don't know anything about planning, look at a meeting notice that says we're going to hear Amendment 7-8-C-L3X in this northwestern part of a county with an incomprehensible map attached to it, right? Go to this meeting. You're not going to do that, right? Oh, yeah, okay. Prosperi would, but maybe nobody else would, right? He's back there saying, of course I would, right? But it's, so it's the way we talk about DRIs and OSPs and EARs and comp plan amendments that I think it's the language and the inaccessibility of it that we've sort of promulgated as professionals that I think has gotten in the way. But I think if you sort of say, let's talk about the future of your neighborhood, let's talk about how we're going to adequately house everyone that lives in your community, if we couch it in terms that people can actually make sense of, I think people would care about it. As for why Amendment 4 failed so miserably, and I was shocked. I was thinking, I really thought it had a pretty good shot at failing, and I was way off, so it tells you what a good forecaster I am. There's sort of one or two ways to look at this. One is people looked at it and said, you know what, we trust government, and we believe that they know what they're doing. That's sort of the generous view. Or it's that people said it is going to drive up our taxes, and you've sufficiently scared us. And I'm guessing that really is what's going on. But again, I think it's the way we talk about planning that inhibits the public debate.
You want to?
Yeah, I don't know exactly without going any kind of survey or research about why Amendment 4 did not pass. But from anything that we know at this point is anecdotal. From my conversation with my colleague and some of my communities, seems like is the scale technique by the components of the amendment really scare many of the voters away. Seems like many people ask me, what is that? And I said, oh, how do you vote? And they said, well, I don't know about it. And so I just see some ad says it's going to drive tax, and so I just vote no. So at this point, any answers to it anecdotal. It's not systematic.
And yet Amendments 5 and 6 had very little vocal support, and people read them and passed them. Anyway, the state 2 years ago the Senate passed Senate Bill 360, which rolled back concurrency. And I think a lot of planning people said that concurrency went too far. It forced development to go further and further out. And there were some in the state government who said this is a reasonable solution. But as the politicians took hold of Senate Bill 360, they expanded the reach of it to basically waive concurrency, traffic concurrency, in most developable areas in the state. The next year, they talked about tweaking it to make it, well, after that, Secretary Pelham refused to basically recognize what they thought they were doing and blocked it. So the next year they were going to tweak it, but they held off because they knew Amendment 4 was on the ballot. Now you have a state government entirely in the hands of basically the Senate leader, Herodopoulos, and the House leader, Cannon, who are both actively involved in rolling back growth management protections. It really isn't a case of what will the governor do right now in Florida. It's a case of what will the House and the Senate do. And there is a chance that they will come back with a Senate Bill 360 that will be very, very much not open to the interpretation that stopped it the first time. So you're looking at a future where there will be no growth control based on traffic, which has been probably the singular control over the years. And you're going to be left with an open field. Here at a time when developers are backing off, nobody's proposing anything new, and you would think that planners would have a chance to really put forth ideas and try to shape growth management in a different way. It's all being scaled back. So what is the state going to be like if you take away concurrency as a method of controlling growth? And what will be left in terms of local control tools that, even absent a state involvement, but with a local control, what will you have left?
Well, I'll take a first crack at that. Transportation concurrency. I asked this question to Gene earlier. What's sort of some of the big successes and failures? Transportation concurrency might very well be in the top 2 or 3 of the failures of our growth management system. I actually think it's encouraged the exact type of development that we don't want. Because of concurrency, we were not promoting development in urban locations because the roads were constrained. We was encouraging development at the fringes. So I actually think transportation concurrency got in the way of good planning outcomes oftentimes. So that's sort of an observation on the side. Your question was really about sort of moving forward. What controls do local? Go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Follow though. Mm-hmm. But if you waive traffic concurrency on the outer edges as well as in the inner coastal areas, what control do you have?
No, well, having said, I believe in the way the state was headed with Senate Bill 360. I don't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but I will. The legislature actually had a really good idea there. They were going to eliminate transportation concurrency for roads in urbanized areas. Now the question is, what's the definition of urban? And that's where the problem lay. Right, the way they defined it was Live Oak, Florida is urban, right, which is a tiny, tiny little town up off of I-10, up near me, right? This is not an urban place that essentially got this transportation concurrency waiver. So the idea was good. I actually think that doing something like that does make a lot of sense. I don't know how much you want to talk about transportation concurrency. So
well, in its absence, you're going to be allowed to develop on the fringe with no concurrency requirement at all. You were saying that it drove people further out. Well, if it's an equal playing field where you can go further out or go in, where are people going to build?
Well, there's others. Are they getting rid of concurrency as a whole, or just transportation concurrency? There are other elements: stormwater, potable water, sewer.
They don't seem to get caught up by that.
Well, occasionally they do. I think more often than you'd think. In terms of what else can local governments do? Well, they do still have, unless we get rid of Chapter 163 entirely, they still have these little things called comprehensive plans with future land use elements and zoning codes and land development regulations that the state may play less a role in shaping or overseeing decisions made against, but they still. I haven't heard anything suggesting that all that stuff's going away. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm blind.
That's my next question.
Okay, so that's my take. But I want to let Jaap and Zhong-Ren on this.
Actually, I want to take it a different direction. Have you ever read Senate Bill 360? And I would
Yes.
actually tell
Absolutely.
see, to me, the problem is not so much what they were trying to do, but if you read Senate Bill 360, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there is so much language in there. And if we could just have a simple message in these bills and actually tell what we're trying to do instead of having it hidden between all, you laugh about it, but I mean, if you read the stuff, it's just unbelievable. I try to make my students read it.
Well, lawyers like, to predict
Exactly.
predictability and finality. They don't want to leave it open-ended. And bills are legal language.
Okay, well. But I think one of the things is, what that it indicates to me is when I try to find Senate Bill 360 online, you find this language that is stricken through and all these different things, but it's really not clear what it's trying to do. And if you really want to do good planning, you need to be clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Well, the Senate and the House were clear that they wanted to get rid of traffic and currency.
Right.
And Pelham interpreted it to say that it removed the state's role in traffic and currency, but it allowed local communities to keep on the books their traffic and currency rules. The Senate said, no, that's not what we meant. We're going to come back and fix it, but we're going to wait till Amendment 4 is done. So you're going to see it in March and April of this year, where they, but go to a step further. Had Amendment 4 passed, what was to stop them from saying, we will undo the entire comprehensive planning process, and you'll just get to go right to zoning like you can, like you could in the past before 1985? And what effect would that have in Florida? Would that be a better system? Is it time to just say the comprehensive planning process has been a failure?
I've spent the better part of the last 7 or 8 years looking at that exact question. Does growth management work? Does comprehensive planning work? And I like the way Gene put it earlier. I think has it worked like we wanted? No. Has it been successful in very big, easy to measure ways? Probably not. Are we better off having it in place? I would argue until my last breath that yes, it's better off. We have better water quality, we have better stormwater control, we have better urban services in many parts of the state because of growth management, because of comprehensive planning, because of concurrency. Do we still have disgusting, awful sprawl and strip development finding its way across the state? Absolutely, we do. But I think in the absence of it, and again, I've spent a lot of time looking at this, the evidence is there's smoke. I haven't proven fire yet, but I got a lot of smoke showing that we're better off because of that. I would also respond by saying Amendment 4 didn't pass, so at least in the near term, we're thinking comprehensive planning in Florida is relatively safe, although Jaap and I and Zhong-Ren were talking earlier, I don't think it's dead yet. We may get an Amendment 4 reprise in some form. I don't know what that would look like. It looked like a pretty overwhelming response from the voters from my point of view. The other thing I'd mention, I will be quite honest, is other states look at Florida and wish they did what we did, which is at least engage the future a little bit through comprehensive planning and try to look forward and try to think in a big way about land use decisions and transportation decisions and environmental investments and environmental decisions. So I think nationally and even internationally, people come to Florida to learn from our good planning. I don't think in this state, we see the sausage get made, right? So it's pretty awful. But other people from the outside look at the sausage and say, "Oh, that looks pretty good to me." So how's that for an analogy? So.
Well, and maybe we can open up to the others, but if you get rid of, if you keep, I agree they're going to keep comprehensive planning, but they're going to get rid of the state oversight. The state oversight will be drastically reduced, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect the regional planning councils to step in because they've been gutted for 10 years, and there's nobody saying we want a strong RPC. Yeah. So that leaves you back at the local level. And what we heard earlier is, there may be a vacuum of public interest in planning exhibited by Amendment 4. And when you don't have the public interest and you don't have the state hammer, how do you counteract the special interests that seem so able to maneuver their way through the local system and make planning fit their needs? And we talked earlier about planning the big picture, looking at what planners should be doing. But what planners really do is they process plans that developers bring to them. And the way to measure planning success is whether the development is profitable or not. And that's been the American system. And so you were asking about success, so perhaps you'd like to comment on that.